Police lights flashed outside my house, their red and blue glow piercing the still of 3 a.m. I stood in the doorway, hands grasping the knob, weariness settling deep into my bones. I rubbed my eyes trying to make sense of the surreal scene unfolding on my lawn. Lydia Monroe, the self-appointed HOA dictator who terrorized our neighborhood for years, stood on the sidewalk with a smirk, arms crossed, like she owned the block she was talking to, the officers playing the part of an innocent victim and blaming me for stopping her guests from parking in my driveway. Let's rewind. I'm the guy who's private while Lydia illegally tapped to water her garden. My revenge, I flushed her irrigation system with sewage, well within legal bounds, of course. That was just the opening act. The officer attempted to keep straight faces while Lydia ranted about my truck, parked legally in my driveway, but supposedly half a foot too far out for her guests to park in my space instead of the abundant street parking across the street. I was tired, my rage percolating over, but mostly I was shocked. How come to this? Sir, it's a reasonable request, one officer said, his voice even but threaded with incredulity. If you could move the truck so her guests can park, we won't have to escalate. I blinked, disbelieving. Escalate. I laughed. What is this? A global crisis over parking spaces? I wasn't joking, but the sheer absurdity of it all hit me like a freight train. Lydia didn't even glance my direction, too busy basking in her performance. For the officers, I've lived here 20 years and had no trouble with neighbors until this man moved in, she declared, almost exuding self-righteousness. Now he's causing problems for my guests. They should be able to park wherever they please. I shook my head, jaw clenched tight. This wasn't about parking or her so-called guests. It was about control. Lydia had spent years strong-arming the HOA into doing her bidding, and I was her latest target. But I wasn't going to play by her rules, ma'am. Could you? An officer tried to interrupt, but Lydia was on a roll, her shrill voice rising to an ear-splitting pitch. I just want to be treated fairly, she snapped, waving her hands theatrically. Why do my guests have to park across the street like second-class citizens? This is a neighborhood, not a parking lot. This guy is giving everyone a hard time. I opened my mouth to respond, but the officer cut in, probably trying to head off a full-blown showdown. Sir, if you just move the truck, we'll be out of your hair. That's when it clicked. Lydia didn't care about justice or anyone's needs but her own. This was the same woman who'd once trespassed on my lawn to lecture me on weeds by the sidewalk, as her own garden was flourishing with plants watered by my pilfered well water. She'd been siphoning from my private well for months, acting like HOA regulations didn't apply to her. I'd already addressed that, flushing her system with sewage as a legal reminder. She wasn't above the law. Now she was at it again, thinking her petty HOA crusades made her untouchable. She thrived on bullying people into submission, expecting them to give way. Not this time. Officer, I said, my voice even, but rimmed with sarcasm. You're telling me to relocate my truck because her guests won't take the trouble to park on the street like everyone else. Am I hearing that right? The officer looked at me but made no reply. Lydia huffed. I've been nothing but reasonable, and this is how I'm treated. She was working up for another dramatic outburst. I'd had enough with a sly grin. I turned and walked back inside, leaving Lydia and the officers standing there dumbfounded. I wasn't moving the truck and I wasn't apologizing. This was only the beginning. As I closed the door, I heard Lydia's voice rise to a screech. I'll call 911. I couldn't help but chuckle. It wasn't an emergency, but she was a master at turning molehills into mountains, collapsing onto my couch. I could still hear her outside spinning her yarn of victimhood to the officers, painting me as the neighborhood villain. This wasn't about parking anymore. It was about her addiction to control, her need to dictate every detail of everyone's lives. My phone buzzed with an email from the HOA. Another passive-aggressive threat. They've been harassing me since Lydia began her campaign. First 4 loud noises because I dared to mow my lawn at 10 a.m. Then for a minor crack in my mailbox, which she told me was contrary to HOA standards. The HOA did not even hear my side. They were her puppets doing her bidding at every twist. That's when I knew I had to fight back on my own terms. The HOA was not my friend, and neither were the officers if they were going to keep humoring her. Sirens blared again, this time closer. Of course, Lydia had called 911 again. I peeking through blinds. Two more squad cars, lights blinking like a crime scene. Lydia in total drama mode, acting the wrong party with crocodile tears. "This guy's out of control," she blubbered to the officers, her voice trembling with pretend distress. "He's parking in my driveway and my guest can't park. I've never been treated so disrespectfully." The officers looked exasperated clearly, not happy to be dragged into HOA crap at this time of night. "Ma'am, tell me what happened," one asked. His voice tired, Lydia glared at me venomously before diving into her story. "He's been a pest ever since he moved in, and now he's using my driveway so that my guests won't be able to park. I'm just trying to get them settled and he's making it impossible. This is a neighborhood where families live, not the circus. I barely managed to hold back, and I roll a family neighborhood." She was acting like I'd kidnapped her guests. The officer glanced over at my truck, parked legally, not blocking anything. "Would you please move it, sir, to avoid further escalation?" he asked. I shook my head frankly. "I'm not moving it. It's in the correct location. She says she can park across the street. There's plenty of room." Lydia's smug attitude unraveled. "This is unbelievable." She raised her voice to a new shrillo pitch. She redialed 911, feigning sobbing to the dispatcher. "This man won't budge his truck. It's blocking my driveway and I'm at my wit's end." I realized she had no intention of letting this go. She was determined to destroy my life by dragging this out and wearing me down until I broke, but I wouldn't. If she wanted a fight, I'd give her one. On my terms, the next morning I woke up to disquieting quiet. No Lydia yelling in my yard. No HOA emails filling my inbox. It was too quiet, and I knew better than to believe it was finished. Sipping bold coffee at my kitchen table, I started scheming Lydia's game, relied on me cracking under the pressure of police calls and HOA complaints. She was used to neighbors caving, giving way to her tantrums to escape her rage. But I wasn't like them. I wouldn't play her game anymore. I'd turn the tables, step one, gather evidence. I couldn't let her twist the tale. I came outside and photographed my truck on all four sides, showing that it was legally parked away from her drive. Her guests had not issues parking right across the street. This whole situation was a power play. Step two, the HOA. I had called their office and kept my cool, asking for specific parking regulation. The rep informed me I was right, that nobody could obstruct a driveway, and that my truck was perfect. Lydia's complaint was unwarranted for days. I kept watch over her like a hawk every time her guest parked in front of my drive. An outright violation. I took snapshots. The HOA rules were tight, no driveway blocking even temporarily. Lydia did whatever she pleased, but I'd turn hers back on her. I sent an anonymous complaint to the HOA, attaching photographs of Lydia's guests blocking my drive, citing the parking policy, and pointing out her 911 escalation. I included that I would have reported the local authorities if they ignored this hitting send. I smiled she'd applied the HOA against me. Now I was flipping it back on her in the next few days. Lydia was paranoid, peering out her window, sensing danger. I kept taking evidence, building an airtight case. Then the HOA sent a resolution session to discuss our disturbances. This was my moment. The meeting day arrived. I walked in with a folder of evidence, photos, emails, the parking policy, and Lydia's violation records. The room was chilly, long table, stiff chairs, a whiteboard, and a stack of paperwork. Board members sat with bored faces, but tension snapped in the air. Lydia sat at the end of the table, arms crossed herself. Self-satisfied smile suggesting she thought she'd win. I sat down opposite her, meeting her icy stare with calm confidence. She rolled into her victim routine, accusing I disrupted the neighborhood by blocking her driveway. "I just want peace," she said, her voice loaded with fake sincerity. "But this man makes it impossible." I stood setting out my facts, her threat to call 911 over my relocation of my truck, my refusal due to street parking available, and her 911 call over nothing. I showed her pictures of my truck parked legally, then pictures of her guests blocking my driveway against HOA rules. Lydia's haughtiness turned to shock. I gave her the parking policy, highlighting the no blocking rule. The board members exchanged shocked glances. Silence pervaded. A board member spoke. "Lydia, it seems like you violated the rules, not your neighbor." Her face became red with embarrassment. "That's not true. He's lying," she stammered. But her voice broke. The board issued her a warning, citing her guest's offenses for further investigation. Lydia was caught, her lies exposed, leaving the meeting. I felt triumphant. I'd turned the HOA against her, using their own rules to bring down her authority. She'd likely do it again. She wasn't the type to back down, but for the time being, I'd won the block, could breathe once more. Without her little rain of backhanded compliments at home, I sat on my porch and saw the sun set, a neighborly wave, a queer display of friendship. Lydia's hold was broken, and I'd made it so plain. Brains not brawn. I'd proven you could top a despot at their own